So apparently, Destiny had a debate about free speech, anti-debate, and the reason why this in particular is interesting to me is because an organization that I am associated with, I think is the best way I can describe them, mentioned that this is something that they helped organize. So I am curious to see how this debate goes. I do think that there is an interesting conversation about free speech that can be expanded on, especially after everything that has happened in the recent couple years, with the effect of social media. So let's see how this goes in particular.
And in any case, it's Joe Rogan's freedom to talk to anybody he wants, and it's my freedom not to listen.
Like 20%.
20%? Yeah, that content is getting the super government ban and maybe connect.
Let's
All
get
right.
right in.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first of a series of anti-debates on Kainos. Today, we'll be taking on the topic of truth, and specifically, to what extent does platforming dangerous ideas serve truth? So arguing for a greater extent, let's get all ideas on the table, is Michael Shermer. Michael is a writer, historian of science, executive director of the Skeptic Society, and founding publisher of Skeptic Magazine. Shermer was called by Neil deGrasse Tyson a beacon of reason in an ocean of irrationality. And he's about to publish a book called Truth, What It Is, How to Find It, and Why It Still Matters. So welcome, Michael.
Before they get into it, one thing I will say is for me, I'm becoming very skeptical, dare I say, in terms of this kind of free speech absolutism. I think we can all recognize that there are dangerous ideas out there that can perpetuate a very dangerous coalition. So it dawns on me this idea that free speech should be absolutely okay. And there's also a weird conflation of what free speech is. One thing we can all recognize is that there is a difference between the government infringing on your free speech on different topics and private businesses, right? So the government can't tell you what to say in very clear areas that are not very obviously a call to violence or all the other exceptions. A private business like social media doesn't technically have to abide by the same rules and principles to an extent. So I'm curious to see how this conversation goes. Let's dive into it.
And arguing that platforming dangerous ideas does not necessarily or inherently serve truth is Stephen Bennell, aka Destiny. Stephen is a political commentator, a debater, and a streamer. He has millions of followers across platforms because he is willing to engage anyone on any topic in rigorous, good faith conversation, and he is willing to upgrade his positions
Rigorous,
in the face of
good-faith
new
conversation.
information, which is a rare and precious thing in our online public discourse. So welcome, Stephen.
Thank you.
And our facilitator today is Alexander Viner. He is an author, a journalist, and facilitator focused on bringing transformative ideas from the margins of culture into the mainstream. I'm going to hand it to you, Alexander, to take us away.
Thank you very much, Steph. And yeah, Michael and Stephen, thank you for doing this. This is going to be a very, hopefully, unusual style of debate. And certainly my hope is that we can enter some new territory, some new intellectual territory. We will start almost like a traditional debate where each of you will give your position on this question. But we have a bit of a twist because you're going to give a personal story first as to your feelings and your how your perspective developed, and then get into the perspective itself. So first off, Destiny, if you could give us firstly your story, your personal story, and then your position around this question. Again, to what extent does platforming dangerous ideas?
So not only are we going to analyze the validity of free speech absolutism, I do think another important part is to see if this debate format, which like I said before, I've been introduced to beforehand, is effective. So they're starting off with the traditional stuff, opening statements, introducing what your position is, and you can branch off different ways to debate that topic based on what things are said in the opening statement. I am not the biggest fan of opening statement arguments, but I can see the validity of it. And then the personal story, I could see the idea. It helps you resonate your position to something real. and relatable to the audience because people can relate to anecdotes and personal experiences over facts and logic most of the time. So this will allow people to understand your point of view beyond the articulation of the argument itself. So we'll see how this plays out, but I think they're interested.
Serve truth.
Yeah, so I grew up in a Catholic household, went to a Catholic grade school, went to a Jesuit high school, and I would say probably around 15, 16 years old, I was kind of on the way to becoming an atheist. Obviously, as an atheist, I'm a little bit biased, but I would say that any person that is of reasonable and sound mind, when you start asking enough questions, you kind of inevitably start to trend towards a more critical direction that makes it really hard to hold on to your spiritual beliefs, I would say, at least in any kind of like formal, organized way. One thing, I guess, as part of the inevitable journey towards atheism in the late 2000s as a young man, I kind of started reading Ayn Rand. I was like a hardcore libertarian. I identified as an objectivist.
And for anybody rewatching this or watching it live, I do have it on 1.25 speed because it's over an hour long.
I remember campaigning for Ron Paul and everything else. And as part of this kind of like journey, I watched a show called Penn and Teller's Bullshit, which I hope most of you are familiar with, but I'm pretty sure I watched every episode of the first 3 seasons of this show. I love that it was an entertaining show. It fed me a lot of like interesting ideas, critical ways to look at the world. And then through Penn Jillette and listening to him speak, I found out that magicians had this reputation for being these like spiritual debunkers, going all the way back to Houdini. And, as a person growing up, libertarian, free speech was a huge thing. Watching, Penn and Teller do their thing on their show. I started watching random videos on the internet. One guy I came across that I thought was really interesting was I want to say Randy Fine. James Randi.
The amazing Randy.
Yeah, James Randi, who did basically, I think the ultimate culmination of his show. He was a guy who used to be a magician, a stage magician, not real magic, and he also would kind of like go on in his career to debunking people. And I think it ultimately culminated in like $1 million challenge where he would bring different spiritualists or psychics or telekinetic power users onto his show. And then he would do clever little things to kind of expose that, well, I don't think that this trick is actually authentic, or rather, I don't think your powers are authentic. I think it's a trick. I think probably one of the most famous videos was, I think James Heydrich was his name, where it was a guy who would use telekinetic powers to move pages and phone books around or pencils on desks or whatever. And Randy would, pour some styrofoam around it and say, well, see if you can do it again. And the guy obviously can't because he's just blowing to kind of like trick the audience. And yeah, watching this kind of stuff, I would say when I was younger, I say younger, but really all the way up to my mid-late 20s, in my mind, this is like the ultimate version of freedom of speech. You have bad ideas, you've got anybody going on stage to show these bad ideas, and then you've got other people who are skeptical, and then they debunk those ideas. I'm like, oh, well, this is cool. There's a system that works. I would say now at the age of 37, after COVID, after doing politics, after doing debates, when I look back on things like that show, now one of the things I wonder is, what did I gain watching this? Like, was this an idea that needed to be debunked? Like, I think it was cool to watch it happen. I'm sure there was at least one person maybe whose mind was changed. But now I'm kind of thinking like, did I really believe that telekinetic powers were a thing, that somebody who was wise, who could think critically, who could do research, that they needed to invest their time into debunking that idea? How many hours in the day should I spend watching telekinetic powers, psychic powers, spiritual powers being debunked? And I guess that'll kind of be the lead into where I'm at right now today when I try to think about, what does it mean to have freedom of speech or to platform dangerous ideas or to fight against people who are propagating lies or misinformation?
Wonderful. Thank you for that. I'm actually going to invite you to, Steph, what do you think? Because this is part of our experiment. Should we go straight into the position, or do we want to mix it up a little bit? And
the idea, let's mix it up. I think it's nice to start with the personal story before getting into the meat.
Let's do that. So we'll invite Michael then, if you can give your personal story about around this topic.
Yeah, sure. Happy to do so. Yeah, that was a fascinating account there, Destiny.
I'm guessing this guy's going to say, oh, this time I wasn't allowed to say what I wanted to say. And because I wasn't allowed to say what I wanted to say this one time, I became a free speech absolutist. That's what I'm guessing this story is going to be.
A lot of overlap with myself. I wasn't raised in a religious home, but I became religious in high school. I was born again evangelical Christian. I went to Pepperdine University to study theology and so on. So I took it all pretty seriously, and then I went off to graduate school and then became an atheist. And then I became sort of a born again atheist, going around knocking on people's doors, telling them I take back what I said earlier about God. And at Pepperdine, everybody was reading Atlas Shrugged. And I thought, what is that? I mean, this thing is a massive book. And I finally read it. It's like, oh my God, this is great stuff. So I went through, like you, my objectivist stage for a while and all that. For me, though, I took a turn more toward science and skepticism and rationality rather than more political issues
never mind.
or religion. And And so what I'm interested in is really the truth. What should I believe about anything? And my background is, in the sciences, social sciences, and then the history of science. So I've kind of have a large, big picture perspective, of how often we get it wrong. And so I start with the principle of fallibilism. We all might be wrong, and the Copernican principle that we're not special, that I'm not special, I might be wrong also. So to me, the importance of free speech is, because you might be wrong, so you got to talk to other people. Anyway, in 1992, we founded Skeptic Magazine. Here's what it looks like. Each issue has a particular theme to it, like one on race and one on trans and one on crime and punishment. Every quarter, we take on some particular issue, and we want to know what's the truth about it. And often we don't know what the truth is. So I have to publish multiple perspectives, and I actually seek out, like we did one on abortion. So I'm pro-choice, but I sought out and got somebody who's pro-life. Give us your best arguments, and she did, and it was great. Because some of those issues are not resolvable; they're not soluble in a scientific sense because they have so much gray area in between. When does life begin? Well, depends.
I mean, generally, I agree to his sentiment that, for the most part, we never know what is the truth. The truth is very valuable in many different scenarios, but this question is not whether or not these conversations are valuable, because I think that is a universal accepted position. The conversation is when the dialogue or the information that is put out there becomes dangerous, and we can point out very clear examples. So you can have a skeptic of differing opinions, and I have differing opinions all the time. I rarely say no to someone coming on the podcast and having a conversation, regardless if I agree with them or not. And I kind of dissect their positions and try to understand them better. But there is a realization that not everybody is able to break apart arguments, understand arguments, debunk arguments. So that type of information that is put out there can be normalized, accepted, and create a radicalism. So that is what I want him to address, not these very clear examples that everybody agrees with.
How you define it. And, pro-life people define it differently than pro-choice people. So just from the very beginning, you're going to get different perspectives on that. And that tells us something about the search for truth. And then finally, I write books in addition to publishing the magazine. The latest book is on this topic, truth, what it is, how to find it, why it still matters. And so I'm still searching, and I think I'm just going to be searching until, the lights are out, including on that particular topic, where do I go when the lights go out? And the answer is, I don't know. And you don't either. Nobody knows if there's a life after. So, but in that case, I better make the best of this life. And that's what I've tried to do.
Brilliant. Thank you. I know, but I'm not telling anyone. So that's
you got the secret. Okay. We'll publish it in Skeptic.
That's going to be the entire end of the anti-debate to hear that one.
So thank you, Michael, for that. And so, Stephen, if you would like to give your position on the topic now.
Yeah, so I'm kind of taking this from a broader freedom of speech perspective, because I feel like when we talk about platforming, rough ideas or offensive ideas or ideas that some people wouldn't want platformed, ultimately we're having a discussion at the end of the day on freedom of speech. And then to start this off, I would say that whether we're aware of it or not, I think that most people have an instrumental view of things, such that there is a thing that exists, and this thing exists because it serves some other purpose. And I would argue that even truth, to some extent, fits the bill on that. So the reason why we gather truth, why we try to find out what's truthful, say through a process like science, is so that we can take that truth and then leverage it through a process called technology. And then through that process, we create things that enrich our lives. You can see this when we go out to gather truthful things. Usually we have some kind of end in mind. Medical research starts with the idea of making people healthier. Physics research starts with the idea of gaining a better understanding of the universe, and then this could manifest in so many technologies. Generally, our searches for truth aren't random. They're usually in a particular direction, with us trying to gather some information that will hopefully enrich our lives in some way. Obviously, there's a quadrillion different ways you can analyze speech, but I'm kind of looking at three different prongs when I'm looking at what do you need to have a good free speech environment. The first prong that I have is you need to have an environment where people feel like they can speak freely, obviously. So this might be free from government laws saying you can't say a bad thing about a politician. This might be free from a social media platform that can ban you for any reason if they don't like what you say. This might be free from family or cultural influence where people will ostracize you if you say a particular thing. You need some general amount of freedom in these domains in order to feel like you can speak and have an idea be said. The second part is you have to have the ability for other people to hear you to speak. There are no private languages. You can't utter words into a wall and expect you to accomplish anything. The whole purpose of speech is to be heard by another mind. If nobody can hear or understand what you're saying, then there's really no point to you even speaking. And then the third prong is, I think that you need a framework where you can hold people who are lying and people who are acting in bad faith accountable, so that these people don't overwhelm your system and kind of like hijack it and use it for their own personal gain to the detriment of everybody else. I usually find that when you're looking at these prongs, different political groups will overemphasize different prongs. So liberals tend to overemphasize the first. Now, if you're having a conversation on law, obviously we're usually talking about just the government banning freedom of speech. But I've heard liberals say, well, as long as the government isn't banning a particular type of speech, it doesn't matter if every single social media platform deplatforms you. You still have your First Amendment right. And while that's strictly true, in practice, it's not really true. You don't really feel like you have much speech if literally nobody can hear you say anything. And then for the second prong, I think conservatives tend to overemphasize that, where conservatives seem to think that every single person should be unbanned on every single platform. And as long as you can hear every single thought and word and sound and everything at the same time, that now we have like a good freedom of speech environment. And sometimes I think that they over-index on that, and they have no concept of any type of speech should be banned. And this is for a myriad of reasons that we might get into later. And then nobody really pays much attention to the third prong, because I think it's a little bit scary and uncomfortable. The idea that somebody can censor some speech, or the idea that we need some framework by which there are certain people that just shouldn't be allowed to participate in a free speech environment. But I think that when you have any of these individual prongs that fail, any of the three prongs that fail, I think that your environment is basically completely and totally nullified for the purposes of having a free speech, good conversation. If you destroy the first prong and you have no free speech.
I think I generally agree with what Destiny's saying over here. Slow down, dude. Destiny just talks fast, and it's on 1.25 speed, so definitely not going to slow down. But I think those prongs are very interesting frameworks in defining what free speech is and when free speech is being utilized. So I'm not mad at what he's saying there. I'd have to really think about if I would add any other prongs. The third one is interesting, but let me see how we.
Then obviously we have a single authoritarian entity that can determine what is or isn't spoken about in the public discourse. I think it's self-evident why that's bad. You don't want a single person to tell you what you can or cannot say for obvious reasons I don't really get into. On the second prong, without the ability to hear people speak, there's just no speech happening, right? One person talking to you is a conversation. Two people talking at you, might be an outing with friends. 100 people in a room screaming at each other is not a free speech environment. Nobody knows what's being said. No ideas are being communicated. It might as well be nobody speaking if there's 100 people speaking at the same time. And then the third prong, if you have no ability to hold liars accountable or to get rid of people who are just acting in pure and obvious bad faith, then I think you overwhelm any speech platform so much that there is no true, honest, good discourse happening anymore. And unfortunately, I think we're in the world right now.
I think the battle will be on his third prong. He's probably created that as of recent because of the rampant increase of misinformation on social media platforms and how it's affected the overall populace. Because we, of course, want good speech. There is a question whether bad speech has value at all. And I think Destiny's argument is that bad speech never has value. The only thing you could say in terms of bad speech and its validity is showcasing it and debunking it, or showcasing it and reframing it so people do not either listen to or absorb the bad speech. But that is not an argument for the value of bad speech. That is an argument that bad speech already exists and it's necessary to contextualize it, or at the very least, it's necessary to reframe its understanding. So if you put it in a vacuum, bad speech probably has no value unless you want to argue the instances of bad speech can be determined based off accepted truth versus I guess singular truth. And what I mean by that is singular truth would be a call to reality that is not widely accepted. I think a good example of that would be the idea of the earth being round when it was initially introduced so long ago, where most people thought it was flat. That was obviously blasphemy, right? It was blasphemy all across the board. And the person, I forget which one of the ancient philosophers was the first one that came up with it. I'm sure I could say a name, but I probably would be wrong. But he said that he was correct. He got ostracized. Would that be considered bad speech? So in this conversation, they would have to determine what is bad speech for this argument to have validity. And they would have to determine, is it something based off morality or consensus? we'll see. We'll see how that kind of plays out. What's good, Austin?
How that third prong has kind of failed. I think that we've kind of spent, especially over the past, I have to remember how many years it's been for COVID. We're at 7 years now, I guess, especially in like this kind of like COVID, post-COVID world. I feel like we have lost so many good conversations. I feel like we've lost so many, there's like these mines, these treasure troves of conversations we could have had about, COVID is obviously the most heated example. You know, did we open schools too late? Should we have ever closed the schools? What should lockdowns have looked like? We have had none of those conversations publicly. Instead, it's all focused on whether or not Anthony Fauci was making billions of dollars by telling us not to buy masks. You know, I think there's a super.
Someone said bad speech is protected from government laws except in cases like inciting a riot or yelling fire in a crowded movie theater. That's not like, yes, I understand what the law is. This is a meta conversation in terms of whether that bad speech provides a good environment for free speech. So it's not a conversation on what the current law states. The conversation is if this law should be modified or if this accepted practice should be modified to push better speech that will create a better society of good information. So that's what's going on right now.
Fascinating conversation to be had about vaccines. And, you know, to borrow from Alexander, I actually think, or is it Alexei? I don't know how you prefer your first name to be said, but I think that intuitively, I think a lot of us actually have more agreement there than not. I think that everybody would be for a mandated vaccine on a disease that was latent for 2 weeks and then killed you. I think everybody would say, okay, you need to be vaccinated against that. I'm not going to die. I don't think anybody would want a mandatory vaccine for a slight cold that you have to get every 2 weeks. So I think we all agree like roughly on the principles. We just have to figure out like what is the actual defining line on it. But instead we're talking about whether or not COVID vaccines, you know, make you magnetic, or what spike protein detoxer you need to buy in order to clear your system of the horrible mRNA spike vax particles or whatever. And it's just, there are so many people that have an extractive relationship with our free speech environment where they come in, they sell sensationalist ideas, they make a ton of money doing it, and then there's no accountability for those people. So we spend all of our time from the smarter people either disengaging completely because they don't want to waste their time with the horrible conversations, or fighting against obvious misinformation from obvious bad faith actors who have no engagement or regard for the truth, who also have no accountability mechanism, so they can just continue to lie with impunity over and over and over and over and over again. And I think that's a failed speech environment. You're keeping track of the time? What's my time right now?
You're about on time for that.
Okay, yeah.
Make a final point.
So yeah, I guess in summary, like I would say that freedom of speech is an instrument. It's a tool that we use to arrive at better conclusions. It gives us a greater understanding of the world, and it gives us a direction to move towards, ideally to make life better for all of humanity. And when we don't have the ability to...
He's talking fast because I have a 1.25 speed. Destiny already speaks fast in general, but I sped it up because this is an hour-long conversation, and I want it to go by faster. My mind is broken. I don't know if you call that ADD or ADHD, but I prefer things going back quicker. Maybe I have TikTok brain. Who knows?
Hear honest people making good conversation in a publicly accessible forum where anybody theoretically could participate. When we lose that, either through a lack of the freedom to speak, a lack of the ability to hear, or a lack of the ability to get rid of like bad faith actors, once we've lost that, the entire environment kind of collapses in on itself, and we have a facade of a free speech environment where bad faith actors have just hijacked the system to sell us, you know, entertainment masked as truth or news.
Great. Thank you for that, Destiny. And guys, I'm just going to switch the format here in Riverside. And Destiny, just to check it doesn't mess with your live stream. This is for the Instagram, because I can see it just needs a swap just to say it should just be one person. So Michael, it'll be speaker view now. Michael, if you would like to give your position.
I guess I would start by saying, Jennifer and Stephanie and Alexander, the idea of a anti-debate is great. You know, I've done dozens of debates in my...
I listen to a 1.5, and in a time debate forum, you need to make your points quickly. For sure. You have to speak quickly to get all your points across, especially if you have a framework. I don't know if this is timed. I'm unsure about that. But to be fair, it is fast. I think me and you, Devious, have broken minds. We are TikTok brained.
Career, and mostly I'm trying to
I
win
can listen
them.
to 1.5 too,
I'm
but
not
I'm trying to be
engaging
nice
with this other
to people
person.
who
Mostly
rewatch
he is
this.
talking about God, but other topics. To find out what I should believe about this, and maybe I'm wrong. I'm trying to win, and that's how debates are normally structured, like the Oxford Union debates and the Intelligence Squared Open to Debate people. They have the audience vote ahead of time what they believe, and then at the end you vote. They take a vote to see how many people were swayed by your position or the other person's position. And I've won all 5 of those that I've done, but I got no closer to the truth. The point was not to get the truth. The point was to win, and I like to win because I'm competitive. So I really like this idea. In fact, I've taken to wanting to do more in conversations than debates because they're far more constructive. Okay, now the problem
I agree with conversations over debates. I'm not a big fan of debates. I am good at debate, but I'm honestly becoming very black-pilled on the concept of debate because it's not constructive. It doesn't provide value other than entertainment. And politics shouldn't be about entertainment necessarily. I know I'm a content creator, but at the same time, these are too important of an issues to make a joke of the issues itself. So I prefer conversation over debate.
With the resolution here, to what extent does platforming dangerous ideas serve the truth? Well, you identified it already. What constitutes a dangerous idea? So I wrote a book about this called Giving the Devil His Due. So I'm going to read the most famous case study of this Supreme Court Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes in the famous 1919 case of Schenck versus the United States, in which he concluded that the most stringent protection of free speech would not protect a man in falsely shouting fire in a theater and causing a panic. The question in every case is whether the words used are used in such circumstances and are of such a nature as to create a clear and present danger that they will bring about the substantive evils that Congress has a right to prevent. It is a question of proximity and degree. Okay, so what was this clear and present danger that the United States government had to protect us from? Who was this guy, Schenck versus the United States? Okay, well, Charles Schenck was the head of the executive committee of the Socialist Party of Philadelphia, who during the United States participation in the First World War objected to the draft, that is conscription. Because conscription, if you think about it, as he says, is a form of slavery. The government is taking control of you and your body for a period of time, and you have to go. And if you don't, you're a deserter and you go to prison. And so they printed flyers.
You know what I would for these conversations, what I would want to do is that there are certain times where the conversation can be derailed. So kind of similar to legal circumstances where you can object. I would say objection relevant. Why do I care about the conscription of the individual that put this law into place? Why is that relevant to the conversation we're having about free speech? I would argue objection relevance. I don't know what the fuck this is about, but I digress.
And handed them out to young men saying, basically, here, I'll just read one portion. A conscript is little better than a convict.
The challenge on discourse in the current environment is there isn't a shared reality between both sides and blood sport debate panels. I agree. It dawns on me how I can see the same thing as someone else, and their perception of what they're seeing is completely different. And I'm like, bro, what is going on? I don't know how you rerouted everything to fit into this bubble of, bad things is the best way I'll put that. It is quite unfortunate because you would assume the ultimate ideal is for a better scenario for everybody, right? Better country, better living environments, just better life. I think the point of living is to enjoy it, so we should want the same things. But when we can't share the same reality, and if we're not reaching the same conclusion that this is not bettering X, Y, and Z, that makes me think that there is an ulterior understanding of, or not even understanding, ulterior confines of who you want this betterment for. And that makes me concerned. Mega friend is here. Unfortunately, not for long. I have rehab soon. Ryan, hello. What is good? What is good? Like seeing a jackpot as a jackpot and not a flavor profile. It's jackboot as a jackboot. Yeah.
He's deprived of his liberty and of his right to think and act as a free man. A conscripted citizen is forced to surrender his right as a citizen and become a subject. Okay. Now you can debate that, but he has a good point, and he convinced not a few young men that they were not going to go into the draft. They didn't want to go over to Europe and risk being killed. All right. That seems like an all-American thing, but there's one of these conflict issues that we're talking about here. Should he be free to disperse flyers making that case? Of course. Because one person's dangerous idea, like telling young men that the draft is a form of slavery, is another person's freedom, freedom idea, right? Defense of freedom. And so basically my argument is based along those lines. The moment you set up a precedent that we're only going to ban the dangerous ideas, or more modern parlance, hate speech. Okay, we're in favor of free speech, but we just don't like that.
I don't think anybody's arguing that we are trying to ban hate speech. I think this is, what's the word? Not conflating. projecting. You're projecting an idea that is not being argued.
The hate speech. Oh yeah, who's going to decide what's hate speech? You, me, or you and I going to form a committee? And then what criteria are used to censor certain speech? Ideas that I disagree with.
We can create a
Thoughts that
criteria,
differ from your thoughts.
and we can
And
create a
three,
committee.
It's not just the right of the speaker to speak, but for listeners to listen. When colleges deplatform speakers or students succeed in silencing a speaker through the heckler's veto, the right of the audience to hear the speaker's ideas is violated. We might be completely right, but still learn something new in hearing what someone else has to say. We might be partially right and partially wrong, and by listening to other viewpoints, we stand corrected.
Damn, Brian.
We might be completely wrong, so hearing
Wish you
criticism
well
and
as
counterpoint
well,
gives
my
us the
guy.
opportunity to change our minds and improve our thinking. No one is infallible. In any case, whether right or wrong, by
Rest
listening
up.
to the opinions of others, we have the opportunity to develop stronger arguments and build better facts for our positions. Okay, so that's kind of my summary of defense of free speech. Give some examples. Like in the 1990s, when I encountered the Holocaust deniers.
Although it's bad, I feel like hate speech should be protected by a right of speech. Again, hate speech is bad. I mean, I'm not arguing against hate speech, but I'm arguing against dangerous speech. The reason why I say this guy's projecting is just because you say something hateful, which is clearly bad. I'm glad you recognize that, Austin. Just because you say something hateful doesn't make it dangerous. What makes a speech dangerous is if it perpetuates to a level of radicalism that can endanger many people's lives. I just think these are completely different concepts. So I'll be more interested in him engaging with the concept of dangerous speech versus hate speech, because I troll all the time. I don't care about the concept of denying people hate speech. His point wasn't addressing hate speech. He was talking about expressing a policy stance, so he veered off a bit. He brought up hate speech. Okay, so I agree to an extent that he brought up the policy stance, but then he used a determination of figuring out what speech should be fit in what category and whether that kind of abides by the initial point or the initial concept of the exception of free speech being fire in a movie theater. He used the draft one, and the draft one, even then, I'm like, you can hate it. I still wouldn't confide that as in dangerous speech. But the first example being getting everybody riled up where people can like go crazy if you say fire in the movie theater and they start stomping on people and people are panicking, causing a lot of damage, that is very clearly dangerous speech. So using the term hate speech, I think, is moving beyond the conversation itself to something else. We'll see. I'm sure Destiny is going to bring it up, and we'll see how Destiny handles
I was,
it.
I was just sort of nosing around for Skeptic. What are some new controversy? Like, oh, here's these Holocaust deniers. They're on major television shows. And so I thought, okay, what are the rebuttals to their arguments? And so when I went to Holocaust historians, the response is they're just a bunch of anti-Semites. Don't pay any attention to them. It's like, yeah, okay, that's the genetic fallacy that, the origin of their ideas is what refutes it, but that's not the case. That's a fallacy. Maybe they are anti-Semites. How do I know? But even if they are, what's the response to that particular argument that they're making? Anyway, I made a list of like 20 different arguments that the Holocaust deniers made, and then we published them in Skeptic. Here's their argument. Here's the rebuttal. Here's the argument. Here's why they're wrong, and so forth. And that took quite a bit of work because most historians are not interested in refuting the arguments made by Holocaust deniers. Okay. Same thing with creationists and their challenges to evolutionary theory, Darwin's theory. I saw not a few evolutionary biologists really get their hat handed to them by creationists in debates because they didn't know what was actually at stake. They didn't know what the arguments and the rebuttals were. So I think it's really important that we not just have the speech, but also informed rebuttals or how to prepare yourself for this.
I agree with that.
You don't have to platform everybody. That is, I was teaching at, for example, at Chapman University when Milo Yiannopoulos appeared at
Shout out you, Brian.
UC Berkeley, and he was roundly
moderator
shouted out and protests, and he wasn't allowed to give his talk. And I thought, well, that would be interesting to have him come to Chapman, and we'll protect him and let him hear what he has to say. But as some of my colleagues pointed out, look, there's hundreds of people we could invite to come speak at our campus, and maybe we can invite 6 for the year. Every other month we'll bring in a big speaker. Why Milo Yiannopoulos, and why not somebody who actually has a highly regarded career books, ideas and so on that have been vetted, and even if they're controversial, at least we know this is a reliable person. Whereas Milo Yiannopoulos is more like just an agitator and activist, and you can't platform everybody, so you do have to choose carefully. So there, I think the idea of expertise and trust in our institutions and all that.
Well, at that point, that's not free speech absolutism. I mean, at this point, you agree with my point of view. Okay.
It makes a big difference. And then, so pretty much all the issues that we deal with.
The whole ICE thing for Alex Brady should not be
what should I think about
defendable.
The ICE raids and the incidences in Minneapolis? Well, the only way to get at it is to look at, say, those videos from multiple perspectives. So if I go over to one site, they go, you can clearly see here that she was trying to run over the ICE officer. And then you go over to the other site, looking at the exact same video, you can clearly see here that he intended to kill her, even though he shouldn't have. It's like we're looking at the same video. So how am I supposed to determine the truth of what actually happened? In this case, because it's ambiguous, you have to let multiple people speak at the same time and judge for yourself. Or other examples, when Joe Rogan had on Robert Malone or Jay Bhattacharya during COVID, and people gave him a hard time about this. These guys are fringe epidemiologists, they're fringe doctors, and it's not right to platform them because those are dangerous ideas and it's going to make the pandemic worse. Well, it turns out they were at least partially right about some of the things they had to say. And in any case, it's Joe Rogan's freedom to talk to anybody he wants, and it's my freedom not to listen, or to listen and then go listen to somebody else to rebut him. And Joe, to his credit, has had other critics of those people on his show, and that's how it should work.
Well, I mean, just because you're partially right doesn't mean that the other information that is spouted cause more harm than good. And I don't know, I would question partial right depending on what they say. I don't know, so I have no opinion on it. But that goes against your initial point, the validity of putting things into context, right? With your article, you use it with skeptic, and then you also mention the aspect of being able to debunk material, utilizing the knowledge of the experts. Joe Rogan is an infamous individual that questions the experts. I'm sure people saw the clip recently where Joe Rogan was saying something dumb about experts, and I think Shane Gillis was like, bro, stop doing that. I hate when you do that. This is bad. So if he's creating an environment where expertise is not required to come to very, dare I say, dangerous conclusions, wouldn't you have a problem with that? I'm not saying deplatform Joe Rogan. I'm not saying he can't bring other people on the podcast, but I do think there's a very valid question in terms of the harm caused from misinformation, wrong information that makes people act a certain way that is detrimental to either themselves or the people around them. So I don't know, man. I feel like you are talking out of both sides of your mouth in this specific claim. Personally. Who is Joe Rogan? Joe Rogan's a very famous podcaster. I think he's one of the most famous, arguably the most famous podcaster right now. Loving Erica and her educating Will Duffy on evolution, especially post his effort on the final experiment in art. It's hard to debate people whose stance is religiously based. I'm not sure what you're referring to there. It sounds interesting to me. I'm more agnostic. I believe in like the creationary evolutionary theory. I think it's clear that evolution exists. There is skepticism in the origins of humanity. I really don't care that much. I kind of feel similarly to religion, but I do find the conversation interesting. Someone said ICE doesn't care. They are monsters. ICE is almost entirely staffed by mega cuts. There's a lot of mega cucks in ICE, indeed. I do not like ICE at all. Shane used a solid defense. We're both idiots. Maybe we should listen to educated people. Yeah, Shane Gillis was cooking in that. I was like, yeah, let's go, Shane. Let's go, my boy. Speak out, because Joe Rogan, he ain't one of them ones when it comes to having an educated response or educated opinion.
In the case of Jay Bhattacharya, he wrote that great Barrington Declaration saying that closing the schools, closing businesses and beaches here in Santa Barbara, unbelievable. There was a terrible idea. It's going to cost us more than the risk of the pandemic. He was right. So the only way that we know he's right is because we let him speak. We platformed him. And that's how it works. The only way that we know he's right is because it's going to cost us more than the risk of the beaches here in Santa Barbara, unbelievable. There was a closing businesses and beaches here in Santa Barbara. Unbelievable. You know, there was a terrible idea. It's going to cost us more than the risk of the pandemic. He was right.
But you don't know if he's right at the time of the situation itself, at the time of COVID. It was a unexplainable thing that there was still a lot of very unclear information about. And plus, again, just because he might be partially right, which I'm skeptical of this claim right here, partially right on one instance doesn't make other things he says more harmful. So you're picking and choosing a fact that kind of reinforces something that doesn't really go into the overall point of the potential harm certain information can provide.
So the only way that we know he's right is because we let him speak. We platformed him, and that's how it works. So that's my defense.
Sure. God bless you. Appreciate you, Brian. Joe Rogan. Yeah, Joe Rogan, UFC, former UFC. Joe Rogan, either president or vice president. No, I think that is Dana White. I'm pretty sure Dana White is the president of the UFC. CEO. Yeah, Dana White's the president of the UFC. Erica from Gutstick Gibbon. She's an evolutionary biologist. Will Duffy's a rich pastor who funded part of the final experiment to debunk flat earthers in his congregation. Very interesting. Very interesting. After rehab, hey, best of luck, Brian.
Great. Thank you both. So before we move into section 2, we're just going to have a little bit of time for a combination of what would normally be called rebuttal, but I'm loath to use that word. But you know, what do you agree and disagree with in what you've just heard? And so, Destiny, if you'd like to maybe start us off from what Michael, the position he just shared, what do you agree with first, and then what do you disagree with?
I'll start out by saying, because I don't imagine Michael has gone through all of my content or any of my content. I hope he hasn't, because what a horrible world YouTube politics is. But although I imagine the world of fighting religious people is probably not much more fun. This is a position that I have I call it 55% confidence on. Like I'm like 55, 45. Like I could be swayed from one end to the other. I recognize this is an incredibly difficult. It's just there's so many complexities. It's a very careful balancing act that you're playing on both sides for this. And my reputation online is the guy who everybody calls a Nazi because I debate Nazis, or the guy who people call me a tanky or communist or whatever. Because I do enjoy debating kind of these out there ideas. I've seen a lot of the issues that kind of stem from this. So I'll say on the first part, I would obviously agree, because I enjoy fighting a lot of these fringe and crazy ideas. I like sitting down and reading a full paper from start to finish, and Wikipediaing and Googling all the little scientific terms and bringing on experts and trying to talk them to get a comprehensive view of things. I enjoy that process. I don't think I would be able to enjoy that process in a world where those ideas were so heavily censored.
Dana White is on the disinformation panel of Facebook. Is he really? Is that a panel? I don't know anything about that in particular.
So that you never saw them. So I have a lot of respect and appreciation for the environment we have in the United States. I like that people can say crazy, horrible, stupid stuff, and the government doesn't, fine you for it or arrest you or jail you for it, or at least it didn't before this administration. I don't know if that's true any longer, but traditionally in the United States, you could say crazy, offensive stuff, and the government can't come after you for it. These are things that I greatly, greatly, greatly appreciate in the United States. The two criticisms or the two issues that I have that I think are going to be kind of like the foundational bedrock things that we'll either agree on, disagree on, or have different approaches to, is the first thing is it's this concept of when the government gets in the business of regulating speech, well, now you've got some decider that can tell you who is allowed to speak or what ideas are allowed to be platformed. And I challenge this by saying that I think that already happens. The only difference is it's done on different levels. So right now in the podcasting world, what ideas are platformed or aren't platformed are kind of sort of left up to a couple of large podcasters, maybe Joe Rogan. For instance, if Joe Rogan decides that he wants to host a particular speaker, that speaker is now almost certainly going to be hosted by a ton of other podcast people that are going to want to pick him up. And when I look at people like the Dr. Robert Malone guy, I would consider this is a guy who is largely fraudulent. I think almost every claim that he made was wrong. A broken clock might be right twice a day, and I would consider him right maybe once a day. He might have been correct about some things, but it was only by chance. His epistemic approach to anything was deeply flawed. There are so many reasons why this person being platformed, I don't think benefited anybody. Yeah, there are things that I understand more about vaccines and immunology and diseases and everything else that I didn't before, but did I need to do all of that research to believe that spike proteins don't live in my heart forever, or that vaccines are worse for me than diseases? I don't know if that was even worth necessarily the time. Maybe there's something more interesting to debate or research. So all that to say, not to get on the Robert Malone example in particular, I think that there already is a gatekeeping that happens, but we kind of delude ourselves into thinking that as long as the government's not gatekeeping, then there's an equal opportunity for everybody, which is absolutely not true. And then the second kind of
the first point. I mean, that falls in line with like the capitalistic aspect of those with power and those do not. And it always reaches this very interesting conversation on who should decide on what things are. There, to be fair, I do think yes, Joe Rogan decides, but Joe Rogan decides based off the fact that his audience is so big. So his power is given to him by the audience. I mean, technically, you can make the same argument about the government. The government gets their power based off the people, the citizens. So I do think there is a similar type of impact. I think nowadays you can make an argument that there is a larger impact from individuals that are have these large followings that are able to reach so many people so instantaneously that their impact may be even larger than the government. The question is though, from that understanding, is there something that should be done about this skewed level of influence, or is this something that is created based off what the people want? Is there necessarily a need for the mixture of government and I guess top percentage control is the best term I can use to work together and mitigating their influence against each other? I don't know how you deal with that necessarily. It's an interesting point.
Rock principle I have is I think that humans are not by default truth-seeking machines. And it's interesting to me because I feel like skeptical people fall into this, but skeptical people know more than anything else. You have to train your mind really hard to not fall into bad thought patterns. I think probably the most important class I ever took in my entire life, it was an AP Psych class in high school, and it was just learning how unbelievably unreliable my own brain is. I'm sure if you've been in a psych class, everybody's watched you have to watch like 3 people passing a ball back and forth, and then a guy in a giant gorilla suit walks across the screen, and you don't even realize it until the professor stops and then rewinds, and you're like, oh, geez. We've all seen, I'm sure, the video of the college kids. A robber comes in and steals something from the professor and leaves, and they're asked to give an eyewitness report, and nobody has any idea, what the guy looked like. You get wildly different descriptions, and we're unreliable narratives of our own history. They're just thing after thing after thing. In order to stop, we've seen the ask line test or whatever, where you can see the group dynamics can pressure people into giving answers for things that aren't true. We've heard about Zimbardo's Stanford prison experiment, where people put in different roles, can act in crazy ways that they never would have imagined. We've seen Milgram's experiment, where people can torture other people as long as there's another person that they can diffuse responsibility. Example after example after example. All this to say, people have this weird idea that if you put me in front of a multitude of different ideas or a ton of different information, I will pick the thing that's true. And in reality, I feel like psychology and history show us that people will just pick the thing that's the most comfortable for them. And that can be problematic if we're relying on people's inbuilt, intuitive search for knowledge to guide us in any, free speech environment that's fraught with bad actors. So I challenge that. Those are the 2 big things I challenge. So one is that there is already...
I do think people can be conditioned to be truth seekers, though. I believe that there's a lot of environmental factors that decide or that determine your willingness to accept certain realities. One thing that I consistently tell people is to expand your perspective, expand your willingness to understand different point of views. And in order for that to happen, you have to be put in an environment that forces you to engage with these different point of views, to engage with with ideas beyond the bubble that you currently live in. Now, the problem is that most people are not conditioned that way. They're either immediately put into an environment that kind of coincides with their very surface level ideas, and then fall into some type of social media bubble of people that they like. And that's obviously problematic. Or it's something more familial where they condition you to think a very certain way, and then you grow up to be a racist, or you grow up to be X, Y, and Z. You can kind of come up with the term. So I think you could probably argue inherently humans are not truth-seeking individuals, but I do think that's hard to argue because it is very conditional based off environmental external factors. An easily workable falsehood is more commonly accepted than a comped truth. Yes, because a falsehood doesn't need a few things. It doesn't need to be understood from different perspectives, and it just needs to be formulated in an understandable approach based off the common denominator of a very fixed experience. So that is the thing about lies is you don't need the bedrock of the logic chain of what made this thing a thing. Like, you can make up a lie about COVID, for example. You don't need the foundation of understanding all the parts on uh, of what's made COVID a Chinese experiment or whatever. You don't need the underlying facts that played into this ultimate conclusion. You just need the understanding based off people's perception is China bad, scientists can create diseases. China bad, scientists create diseases. This isn't China. China caused it. Very easily understood based off very fixed experiences that come to very simplistic conclusions. So that is why I still stand by the idea. It's hard to say that people can't be capable because of our current environment, which is why I'm super critical on education and the government and not pushing people to kind of expand beyond their current ways of thinking and their current ways of understanding. There are things that can be done much more efficiently. Subscribe, please. What are you talking about, bro? A research for at least 30 to an hour before taking a side. Fair enough. That's good. Research is a lot.
Some gatekeeping that happens, and then two is to make people understand we're not by default truth-seeking machines,
Research is
and
important.
to some extent we need to be on guardrails to make sure that we're not just veering off into crazy territory just because it makes us feel good or satisfy some preconceived notion we have.
Great. Thank you, Destiny, for that. Michael, what do you agree with, disagree with in everything said so far from Destiny's position?
Yeah, those are all good points. I agree with some of that. Let's talk about this, holding liars accountable. Of course, most liars don't think that they're lying, right? I mean, I adopt Jefferson's perspective, let friends be wrong so that you can, get along and not fight about everything. But of course, said friends think you're wrong. They think I'm wrong. I think they're wrong. They think I'm wrong. I'm fond of saying no one in the history of the world has ever joined a cult. They join a group that they think is going to be good. People that act on their beliefs, they're probably self-deceived at worst instead of they're intentionally deceiving. The protesters on January 6th that marched down to the Capitol building, we know most of them actually believed it. They told us, even the guys that went to prison, they said, yeah, I think the election was stolen. Even after they got out of prison, I still think the election was stolen, right? Because the boss said so they believed it. Or, the ICE protesters, they're told that the ICE agents are like the Gestapo, Trump is like Hitler, these are the Nazis, and they are disappearing our innocent citizens. Well, if you really believe that's exactly what's going on, of course you'd be outraged. Of course you'd go out there and scream and yell and blow whistles and maybe cross the line and get in the middle of the street, and then bad things can happen. Okay, so people.
Oh man, I disagree with his. I understand the point. I disagree with his comparison because there's no evidence of the election being stolen, and relying on one individual and his posse to determine truth is flawed. There's multiple different types of information. Now, I'm not saying that they're Nazis or anything, but I also think a lot of people are coming to conclusions and protesting because they did see Renee Good get shot. They do see children getting taken. They do see people taken out of stores and taken out of their homes almost completely naked. They do see the facts of most people that are being detained and put in these weird prisons are have no criminal history. They do see people who are getting taken regardless of U.S. citizen. They do see racial profiling based off you are speaking a certain way or some type of look, right? So these are information that is factually correct that can be misperceived in terms of overall conclusion of Gestapo or Nazi or whatever, even though I think Donald Trump is a fascist and I think MAGA is MAGA does support fascism. Sure, but there's much more verifiable evidence that can be confirmed of things that you would understand people be outraged about. In terms of the election was stolen, all of that has been debunked. All the information is wrong, and nobody can say otherwise. They just say, "I don't care," right? So I just think it's a false analogy, false comparison. I understand the point, but I do think it begs the question. My sister does her research for hours a day, still doesn't mean her sources are valid or that she comes to a good conclusion. Algorithms are engineered to affirm a bias. I agree to that. It's very difficult, which is why I don't blame people for not understanding or knowing all these different things. Most people do not have time for that, regardless of the research. And oftentimes, people can affirm their bias by looking for very particular information. I have news sources that I trust that just give me information, and then I come to conclusions on my own. But even then, there's always going to be a certain level of bias in any information that you absorb, unless you read the primary resources yourself. So it's tough, no doubt about it. But that also goes into, okay, you do other research, you do it correctly. Even all that can mean that there's a shared reality that's not similar, and somehow we still come to different conclusions.
People act on their beliefs. Now, are they held accountable? Okay, let's talk about that for a minute, because Destiny has a good point there. Well, we already have laws in place about libel and slander, and telling lies about somebody that then harms their reputation, they lose their job, or whatever. Yeah, you can sue them for that, and those things happen all the time. So there are standards that real journalists, have to meet, and places that have fact checkers and editors will be very careful about that. Before we publish this story about this guy who allegedly embezzled or he cheated on his wife or whatever it is, we better make sure that we can defend this in court.
Yeah, they always talk about, oh, this did not get done because of what do they say? The trial was not pushed because of standing or whatever. It's crazy.
We get sued. False advertising by companies, they can get sued by the federal government for that. So we have a lot of things in place, restrictions on speech. I cannot, if I happen to know the launch codes of our nuclear weapons, I can't just freely post those on my X account, right? So we have lots of restrictions already in place that most of us, I think, agree. Yeah, that seems reasonable. It's always in the sort of gray areas there. Gatekeeping, yeah, okay, so if we move off the page of what the government can do to restrict our speech and just go to private companies like X. So we know that before Elon bought Twitter, that from the Twitter files, that they were restricting people's speech. We know from the emails we can see amongst the employees that they were, for example, censoring Jay Bhattacharya's Twitter account. Jay Bhattacharya, again, the co-author of the Great Barrington Declaration, cautioning the government not to close schools and so forth too early or too long. And anyway, had we not known that the government was doing that, after Elon bought it, wow. So there was some gatekeeping going on there by the government through a private corporation. So, even private corporations, when they restrict speech, they're not always innocent in this, right? Now Elon lets everybody on there. Okay. Even the crazy people like Alex Jones and some of these anti-Semites and Holocaust deniers, I can't stand it. I really wish they weren't spewing this bullshit, but they are. And my argument would be, let them go ahead. This is my opportunity to debunk them, and I'm going to do that. And, that's the way to do it. I have a big.
That's not a good argument. Again, this goes back to my initial statement. You're not arguing in favor of bad speech, i.e. dangerous speech. You're arguing in favor that it exists so I can debunk it, to contextualize it. You might be able to argue that it creates a career for you, I guess, but there's no value you're attributing to the things that you already recognize as very dangerous. It's not an argument to say that. I can contextualize it, so let me. Okay, that doesn't mean that this is good. And there's very few people who can contextualize it, who can frame it in a way that layman people can understand that it is bad speech. It's like, come on.
Piece coming down about Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson as the new Holocaust deniers. Because I know this, I wrote a whole book about these people and David Irving in the 90s. I've heard all of this before. I'm just asking questions. And we call that JAQing, jacking off. That's what they're doing. I'm not saying the Holocaust just didn't happen. I'm just wondering how they could have cremated that many bodies per day at Auschwitz-Birkenau, at Krema too. And when we're told that this, blah, blah, blah. Okay, well, I have the answer to that. Should X say, you can't say that on our platform? I wish they wouldn't. And in any case, this is a sign of our times. Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson, they don't need X. They have, millions and millions of followers. Why? I don't know. I just wish I understood why it is people gravitate to that. Maybe it's part of the economic model, but it is disturbing. Okay, last comment on the default to truth. This is a big debate in cognitive psychology circles. Do we default to truth? Do we just kind of believe whatever people tell us? There's some truth to that, because who has time to fact check everything anybody says? We don't. So we have to offload onto institutions and experts and journalists and newspapers and magazines what we hear. I mean, I've never been to Ukraine. How do I know what's actually going on there? I have to trust what the newspaper, well, maybe I don't trust them all. So I read the Wall Street Journal, I read the New York Times, I watch Fox News, and I watch CNN and MS Now. I just try to get multiple sources.
Watching
Otherwise,
Fox News and being
I may be deceived, but I kind of have to do some trust in this, or else, I wouldn't get out of bed in the morning. Now, that said, I don't think people are as gullible as we think we are. Like Destiny, in some of the examples you gave, like conformity, like you show a group of people 3 lines and then you have a matching line. And so they pick whatever, if the actual subject is down the line from the other people that have picked the line that they think matches, which is the incorrect one, yes, they do tend to conform. But if you have one person earlier in the lineup picking the correct answer,
yeah, Austin, Fox News is a very bad news
pick
source.
the correct one rather than conform to the majority. So there are ways to tweak that. Even Milgram's famous shock experiments. If the subject that was being shocked, they're not really shocked, is actually in the room with them and they can see it, they're far less likely to conform, to obey authority. Or if you actually have to take the person's hand and put it down on a shock plate to make them obey authority, they're less likely to obey authority. So there are ways to get people to be more rational. The gorilla, the guy in the gorilla suit. If you get everybody focused on one particular,
again, that he basically said what I already said. There needs to be a level of environmental conditioning for this to be the case. So the question is, how do you create a environment where people are more rational? Right now, we do not have that environment. That's the problem. Yeah, Fox is extremely biased. That whole thing where they got cooked for the Dominion stuff, they deserved it.
Thing, count the passes. But if you don't do that, if you say count the number of passes by the subjects, but also look out for other things, they're more likely to see the gorilla. And this is why, like in jury selection and so on, Elizabeth Loftus's research, you mentioned this, Destiny, of, you show a video of a little crime being committed and you ask people what they saw, like what color was the guy's hat? He wasn't even wearing a hat, and everybody saw a hat, right? But lawyers know about this, and so they counter it. And so in the law, the way we get to the truth is you have these adversarial, like a debate, you have adversarial sources fighting each other, making the case for their clients on each side, or he's guilty, he's innocent, and then the judge or the jury is the peer review. And so, but the only way to do that is that they could really be free to make their case, and then hopefully we get to the truth of that. Anyway, that's my response to that. Sorry for the coffee.
Okay, and solid start for the platform for the anti-debate. We need to develop some of these ideas a little bit further. Some very interesting points that are being brought up, but I need to expand on a few things. I want it to be expanded, because I'm unsure if Michael actually agrees with free speech absolutism, and I'm unsure his position on the value of dangerous speech. So that's something I need to be expanded on. As for Destiny, I'll be more curious in his position expanded on in terms of the unreliance, or what's the best term? Not unreliance. The uncharitability in terms of people's capacity to seek truth. That's probably something to expand upon as well.
No problem. Thank you very much, both of you. So we're going to go into the next phase now. And I don't know if anyone's seen the Tarantino movie From Dusk Till Dawn, where the film starts in one way and then suddenly turns into a vampire movie. It's kind of what's happening.
Great movie, man. Dusk Till Dawn, great movie.
Here, in the sense that we're going into a different phase, which is now unlike a debate. What we've just done is, useful. It's useful as a way of establishing perspective, and you both did a great job and eloquently explaining that perspective. What we're going to do now is we're going to drill into specific examples around this question. However, we're going to do something else first, because what I noticed listening to you both is that while you have differences, of course, in perspective around this issue, there was I wrote down 2 words: trust and betrayal. And I'm curious, before we do anything else, I would like to invite you, if we for a moment just set aside the energy of yes, but, and okay, yes, but you said this, and that's where our minds go often with this. I'm curious to hear, and for you each to hear, what your relationship is with trust in society, let's say, because my sense was that you both feel mistrustful that people are equipped to some degree, equipped to truth seek well, but you have different responses to it. So, and I'm paraphrasing here, and I know I'm simplifying, but Michael.
You know, that's actually a very interesting point. Shout out this moderator. Destiny has a lack of trust in the people ability to find truth. Michael has a lack of trust in the institutions to determine what truth is. So that's a good question. Very good way to connect it to both individuals.
Because of that, there's a sense I got that, well, the only way to be sure that we don't have some kind of power structure telling us what is a dangerous idea or not is to open it all up. And Destiny, from you, I had the sense that, there is equally, we're creating environments that are just toxic for free speech in the first place, and we can't really trust each other in those environments as well. But rather than talking about the nature of trust, I wondered if you would both just speak a little bit to what is your relationship to trusting society, trusting that we live in a society where we can, trust each other to actually come to truth in some way. So maybe Destiny, what comes up for you with that question?
Oh man, I think the tie-in is valuable. I don't really like the question because it's not expanding the overall point. The overall point is trust in relation to determine the value of free speech. So his relationship with trust in society, I think, is kind of irrelevant to me because it doesn't relate to the overall. I guess it kind of relates, but it's not focused enough to the overall point to expand the understanding for the audience. I'm not a big fan of this question. I think it's a little bit too as he said, it kind of shifts too much to the overall conversation.
So
shifts too much away from the
when I'm looking at anything in life, this especially applies to economics and then finance and then branches out to what we're talking about, online platforms, everything else. I just try to look at where the incentives are. So I like, Shermer brought up the example of January 6th, which I think is actually a really great example. If you were to tell me that of all the people marching to the Capitol, that 99% of those people genuinely believed that the election was stolen, I would probably agree with you. Both my parents are MAGA. I think they both probably thought the election was stolen. I think, unfortunately, they're very earnest in their beliefs. I think that they genuinely, truly believe that. I had a debate with Owen Schroyer, and I challenged him on stage because I said the first person to break the window to get into the Capitol was a Proud Boy, was Dominic Pizzola. And I challenged him $5,000 on that. And he refused to accept the bet on stage because he knew that he was lying. So I think there's a difference between your kind of average layman that is navigating media environments and other pariahs or extractors of value that are navigating these environments. And I think it's good. I think it's important to make that distinction. I think that backing up, I guess, if you look at the way the human mind works, I think our best ability as people, or one of our best abilities, is we have this ability to recognize and fit patterns exceedingly well. And if you try to go back to the environments where humans survived, in early existence, if you have three hunters standing shoulder to shoulder and a bush shakes in front of them, two of them are going to run away because they're going to assume it's a predator. And one guy might have a genuine, curious, scientifically inquirious mind, and he wants to go up and investigate, and he'll get eaten by a lion. It's not very good to be curious in that perspective. I don't think curiosity is rewarded all the time, at least in environments that humans come from. So there's a lot of ways that we overfit data, things like racism or misogyny, or there are so many mathematical things. You have like base rate fallacy errors, and people think that you need a sample size of 100,000 to reach a high confidence interval. And there are so many different things you have to learn and then unlearn about yourself and your own intuitions if you want to get into data or numbers, that I just don't think the average person has ever spent the time doing this. Now, I don't think that the average person should have to. I think it would be ridiculous to expect them to, but it would also be ridiculous to expect an average person to be able to sit in front of somebody who we might know is trying to push a lie to them and expect them to be able to discern that lie, and then expect them to be able to discern two people that are debating that lie when the layman just has no concept or no base level of experience to even understand what the two people are saying. So yeah, I guess my trust in society, like I would say it's low, but that sounds bad. Most people just don't have the time. We're so specialized today. Like think about these losers from 5,000 years ago that they called like polymaths and stuff because, they figured out that you can use a variable for math, or they figured out that, whatever, a triangle has three sides. It's like, wow, this guy's a genius. Like today, every research paper has 100 different co-authors because you need so much specialization to know so much about whatever the areas of research are that, yeah, I just think it's very, very, very difficult for the average person to keep up in that environment without more careful guardrails in place.
Awesome, thank you. So, Michael, what about you? What's your relationship to trust in society and trust in general?
Yeah, those are all great.
We stopped Owen as almost as hard as Alex O'Connor whipped Dinesh. Didn't see the Alex versus Dinesh. I did see the Destiny versus Dinesh, and Destiny did a good job in pretty comfortably destroying Dinesh. The Owen one I might have seen. I'm not too interested in like religious debates because I'm agnostic. So I don't want to be the individual to start talking ill of religion necessarily. I have my gripes, but I don't want to be I don't want to be that guy. I don't want to be that guy.
Good examples, Destiny. This is such a perfect example of what I've been saying, that this kind of critical thinking needs to be taught really in high school, and not just an AP class. Everybody, maybe in middle school, should learn all the stuff that you learned, so that when you go out into the
You can start critical thinking in elementary school. The moment your brain is able to start understanding concepts, the moment your brain is able to understand 2 + 2 = 4, then you can literally start learning critical thinking then. Now, the complexity of the critical thought is obviously depending on depending on the level of maturity and intelligence, I guess. But I agree. Again, they're saying all the things that I already said, man. Come on.
world and you encounter these claims, you could be
Fuck
like
it.
Ben and Teller, the Amazing Randy, with your bullshit detector, because it's absolutely the case that it's everywhere. You mentioned pattern seeking. That's my idea of what I call patternicity, the tendency to find meaningful patterns in random noise. And the argument I've made, I think that you're echoing, is imagine you're a hominid on the plains of Africa and you hear a rustle in the grass. Is it a dangerous predator, or is it just the wind? So this is a signal detection problem.
Good point.
And it's just costlier to make one kind of error than the other kind of error. So if you assume the rustle in the grass is a dangerous predator and turns out it's just the wind, that's a false positive, but no harm. But if you make the other error, you assume it's just the wind and it's a dangerous predator, that's a false negative. Your lunch, you get a Darwin Award for taking yourself out of the gene pool early. So we are the descendants of those who tend to be a little more risk averse and cautious and make one kind of error than the other kind of error. Now, again, most of us don't have time to fact check everything, right? So on January 6th, how do I know that the election wasn't stolen? Maybe it was. I never went to any of those.
Even an example like that, the determination is based off the distinction of noise and sound and environment. You have to have a certain level of knowledge to either tell the audible difference between wind and a predator. You would also have a certain level of conditioning in figuring out the time of day and the likelihood of a predator in the vicinity. But that takes knowledge and experience. So everything kind of relies on your capacity to do X is based off the conditions for you to do X. It's just we don't have the conditions. That is the biggest point. We don't have the conditions. So if we do not have the conditions right now for people to rationalize, basically, then we either have to do one of two things. We have to create a system that is more fit to put people in this type of state of mind of rationale, agreed upon, good rationale, or we need to, if we can't create that system, we need to limit bad information, or we need to limit harm, dangerous speech that utilizes the current conditional system to create radicalism, bad thought, bad conclusions. So what is the best way to do it? What is the most realistic way to do it? The quickest way to do it is obviously private companies determining what dangerous speech is. So it's a question. How's the communist revolution going, guys? What?
Polling places where you saw the kind of grainy of videos of a truck pulling up in the back of that place in Arizona with the boxes that maybe ballots, maybe not, who knows. And you see these claims being made. I don't have time. I have a job and a life. I don't have time to go to Arizona and check out what was actually going on there. But there are people who do, like the Justice Department. So when Attorney General Bill Barr said, and he's a lifelong Republican and voted for Trump twice, said, we looked into it and we examined all these particular cases and we found no fraud. To me, that's it. I don't have to worry about this anymore. I don't have to go fact check it myself. I trust the institution working. I know some MAGA people that threw Bill Barr under the bus for that, but hey, what's your option? Do your own research. Do you really have time to go check out every single voting precinct and go to every person that worked there? And so, of course not, right? So trust is just super vital. Back to your objectivist economic policy destiny. No country could be an objectivist free market without the rule of law and private.
I'm locally too slow for this shit. No worries. I just the value of this conversation is dawning on me. Like, we're not expanding on the thought processes. I'm skipping a little bit.
Right. That has been fundamental, it seems, to both of your lives and careers. And I'm curious why. Of all the things you could be doing, why did you each focus on this? Why are you having debates and
I don't care why they have debates. I care about Michael expanding on his free speech absolutism take, because it seems like he doesn't believe that. What is this? The suicide contagion scenario. Interesting. Let's see. Welcome to debate YouTube. There's no good faith anything. Well, no, I mean, everybody's being good faith here. Let's be very clear. It's just they're doing a new debate format that I don't think is getting to the point. Trump demanding partial government and control of probate firms like Intel, Westinghouse, all while waiting for the redistribution of wealth. Oh, if we're talking about Trumpism, communism, it's definitely happening.
The first scenario I want to give is, let's imagine that there is a kind of social contagion spreading online, particularly among sort of 17 to 20-year-olds. So some of them are adults, technically, but their prefrontal cortexes are still forming. So legally adults, they can do what they want, but this is a suicide contagion, right? So there is, if you imagine what I would argue was, to an extent, a social contagion around gender-affirming care. This is much more widespread. It's you don't know a kid who's not either looking at content to do a suicide. There's many suicides happening. What do you do in that situation? So, Destiny, what do you think would be a sensible response in that situation?
First, I would see how they vote. I'm just kidding. I'm sorry. What are we allowed to ask more questions about this, or because the first question would be the how they get exposed to this, and then
online.
I'm be honest. I was not paying attention to the scenario
So, like,
he proposed. Hold on.
What do you think would be a sensible response in that situation? This is much more widespread. It's you don't know a kid who's not either.
I used to watch these people, bro. There's never getting to the point both senators talk at each other and post their post debate YouTube clips claiming they both won the debate. I mean, I don't know. There's no senators here, so I don't know what you're referring to. Generally, yeah, but this is not like what you're referring to. This is completely different.
Looking at content to do a suicide. There's many suicides happening. What do you do in that situation? This is much more widespread. It's you don't know a kid who's not either looking at content to do a suicide. There's many suicides happening. Actually, here's what I think. But see if you can kind of tune into the person just a little bit more. The first scenario I want to give is, let's imagine that there is a kind of social contagion spreading online, particularly among sort of 17 to 20-year-olds. So some.
Oh, debaters. I was confused too. Debaters. I don't think that's what they're going to do here. This is not a toxic gotcha type of debate. I understand what you're talking about, but this is just not the same. Like, generally, I agree with what you say, but
some of them are adults, technically, but their prefrontal cortexes are still forming. So legally adults, they can do what they want, but this is a suicide contagion, right? So there is, if you imagine what I would argue was, to an extent, a social contagion around gender-affirming care. This is much more widespread. It's you don't know a kid who's not either looking at content to do a suicide. There's many suicides happening. What do you do in that situation? So, Destiny, what do you think would be a sense?
Okay, now I understand the scenario. Okay, now we're going to be able to test the logical foundations that have been approached in this conversation or debate or whatever you want to call it. Because Michael is for free speech absolutism. This would be an example of dangerous speech. It has no value other than radicalizing, and has no value other than creating a more normalized perception of suicide. maybe even making it a conclusion or making it an answer for a life that is deemed bad. Simplest way to put it. So, what is the best way to deal with this contagion? Should you censor it? Should you stop it? Because you can't contest it, really. I guess you can, but not the entire contagion if it's more widespread than the growth of the LGBTQ movement. So this is a good scenario. I like this.
Sensible response in that situation.
First, I would see how they vote. I'm just kidding. I'm sorry. What are we allowed to ask more questions about this, or because the first question would be how they get exposed to this, and then
Online.
so
online,
like, is it online like they're like adult only, like dark web stuff, or is it like on YouTube?
It's everywhere. It's on Instagram. It's on YouTube. It's
TikTok.
And then is this a style of content that is like can I conceive of any other value of it? So like, does somebody is this all coming from somebody who discovered a cool way to make nuclear reactor watches and people are just using the content to now kill themselves, or is it literally just videos on how to kill yourself? Like, that's it.
It's videos on that, and maybe the deeper philosophy of why one should be allowed to, right? Let's say there's many different.
Yeah, this is a very good question. Finally, we're getting to some meat, some good meat. This is about to be some good meat. Someone said Destiny always looks bored outside of Bloodsport debate. It wasn't that long ago that he was saying his civility art didn't feel like it achieved much. To be fair, he's not being civil. So, all right. My understanding is Destiny is trying out this new method. This is called anti-debate. So he's just participating in this new thing called anti-debate. I was introduced to the concept because of an organization I work with called Head On. And they apparently, people that he was working with behind the scenes are trying to create this new type of conversation called anti-debate to push conversations forward. So Destiny is kind of like a guinea pig to this style. I see him on Friday. So when I talk to one of the guys that are figuring out this idea, I'm going to go give my opinions about this. I think there are good, interesting things about it. And I think there are problems about it. So I wouldn't consider this the same as Destiny's whole like passive, not, I wouldn't say he was pacifying, but showcasing Nick Fuentes or his debate with Ben Shapiro or Jordan Peterson. I think this is more trying to be involved in a format that potentially can create an environment of healthier conversation. Not even debate, healthier conversation.
Expressions of it, but the key thing is there's a dangerous idea, the most dangerous idea perhaps, and it's spreading in many different ways.
Okay, and then in terms of magnitude, this is affecting a serious number. It's not like 20 kids; it's like hundreds or
these are all good
thousands or tens of
questions.
thousands.
Like 20%.
20%. Yeah, that content is getting the super government ban, and maybe kinetic strikes on people that are hosting the content. Yeah.
Okay, great. So Michael, what do you think?
Yeah, well, because they're minors, that's a different thing. We already agree that.
Well, he said 17 to 27. So you can't use the minor example for your full argument. You can use it from 17. Then there's 18 to 27 you have to contend with.
The government should restrict minors from, let's say, driving, drinking, smoking, getting a tattoo without parental consent, going into the military, and so on. We have all kinds of restrictions to protect them because they're not able to make.
Don't let him filibuster like this. He needs to answer the question. 18 to 27 is not minors.
Those kinds of decisions. So when the trans social contagion thing took off, I don't know, about 10 years ago, where it became cool to be, the other sex or other gender rather than just goth or something harmless.
Literally only 17-year-olds can be considered minors. There's a legitimate conversation, shout out Australia. Should you ban social media for 16-year-olds and younger? I'm starting leaning to the camp that you should. And this also plays into the bigger argument in terms of speech and everything we're talking about now. But I don't want to digress. As the marriage age to out of the dating market and red pill and conservative circles, also agreed. If I was being bad faith about it, there are states that think 17 years old is an adult. So he's not. He can't use the minor argument for this conversation. He just can't.
Now we're talking about actual physical harm, permanently changing, altering their bodies when they're unable to make an adult-like decision, being encouraged by their team.
Oh, please, follow-up question. What about the 18 to 27-year-olds? Force him to contend with the prompt.
Teachers or the school nurses or their more commonly their Facebook friends. And the suicide instance, and parenthetically, so most European countries in the UK, especially now, are banning all that gender affirming care for minors. And the United States will take longer to get there because it's a state by state, I think so. But we'll get there with lawsuits. As for the suicide thing, I think a lawsuit is going to settle this. There was that teenage boy who committed suicide. I think it was through his Facebook. It might have been Gemini and Google. Now I'm forgetting, but they have all the exchange with the AI that this boy went.
Yes, there's a teenage boy that was talking to this AI, and the AI convinced him to end his own life. I do know this example as well.
Through where the AI is basically talking to him in how to do it. You know, and it's like, well, should I use a rope? Well, a rope's okay, but try this, you know, or whatever. I tried that, it didn't work. Well, try this, you know, and I'm not sure I should do it. Oh no, you should do it, you know. And the parents are now suing that company. I'm sorry, I forget if it was Facebook or Google, but that's gonna settle a lot of that.
I'm pretty sure it was an app. I'm pretty sure it was just an app that did it.
Again, because they're unable to make adult decisions, you know, adult consequences.
Yeah, I remember
like
the example. I talked about it on my podcast.
Sterilized or never having a normal sex life again, which is what's happening to these kids. And
you're talking about the trans stuff. Talk about the scenario. I'm be honest. Someone has to follow up, bro. Answer the question. You have yet to answer the question. You're running away from it by talking about minors and talking about trans stuff. That's not what the scenario was about. As an Aussie, it isn't very effective since most of it requires self-reporting of age and not via some form of ID. It doesn't include platforms like Xbox and Discord. Hard to say it's not very effective since it's just been implemented, but I do agree that it's so... If they don't require a level of check, right? Because we all remember when we were kids, how easy it was to create a Facebook account was disgusting. You just have to make up your birthday. So if it's something as simple as you just type in a lie for your birthday and then you can join social media, that's problematic. And a lot of kids are going to do that. Xbox, I wouldn't consider it to be bannable to go on like voice chats. I wouldn't consider that. I think that's maybe going too far. Discord, for sure, it should be bannable because Discord is just as bad as social media. Or at the very least, have a age restriction for Discord. But age restriction as if you're 16 and younger, you can be on this version of Discord. Or you can go to this Discord community and so on and so on. Most kids, like my youngest, already toggle their age higher for detained game access. I guess I'll be curious to see how Australia does it, since we're not requiring an ID doesn't create a certain level of assurity. I'm gonna lie, the hub and apps like that, you only got to press one button to get in that. Yeah, it's so easy to get on porn sites, like very easy to get on porn sites when you're underage. Certain games, so mature content like Grand Theft Auto. It's very easy to buy those games too. But I consider mature games and social media in different veins personally. I think there are two different.
That matters. So I think some of that will play out on social media. Where the social media platforms will have to legally restrict and censor ideas that are harmful to minors.
So Michael, and then I'll come back to you, Destiny. But what about if it was, let's say it's 40-year-olds, it's 10% of 40-year-olds.
You don't even need to use 40-year-olds, bro. 18 to 27 is not a minor. You don't have to change your question. He just needs to answer the fucking question. I'm sorry for cursing, but that was very snaky for him not answering the question that you gave him, which was very concise.
And it's the same kind of situation.
Or just say like 18 and older, 18 to 22 instead of 17.
Bro, why is that? See, I'll be like Destiny, bro. I'll be like, it's so easy. It's so easy. We're being too nice. When you're moderating, the job is not to make them feel comfortable. The job is to make them feel uncomfortable. Answer the questions. That's how I do my podcast episodes. I'm not here to make you feel good. I'm here to really dissect the point you're giving me.
Okay, well, so, yeah.
Yeah, so they are technically, they can vote. All these people can vote.
Yes,
right?
yes, okay, I know. If somebody wants to do that, why is it any of my business? I tend to go with that. That's kind of the libertarian position.
I tend to go with that. Okay, now this is the meat. This is the juicy filling inside of a pie right now that I've been waiting for. I'm waiting for him to challenge his logical foundations, and now we're getting the responses he can't answer in a very concrete manner. Here we go. Answer the question.
Although, somebody that wants to, like euthanasia, I'm feeling sad today. I think I'll take my life. Maybe there should be an adult. I mean, maybe there should be some restrictions on that. I guess I would have to concede that point. In the same.
There we go. You're not a free speech absolutist. We did it. We solved the problem. You're not a free speech absolutist. A libertarian does explain a few things, indeed.
Same way I've always been not in favor of prostitution, not to decriminalize prostitution. What business is it of mine if consenting adults want to exchange money for sex? None of my.
Why are you talking about prostitution? Stay on topic, bro. Stay on topic. We're not talking about prostitution. That's not the scenario.
Business. Yeah, but it's usually women that get the short end of that business, and so don't we have some obligation to protect women from being abused by drug pushers, by powerful men, and so on? Maybe I could see some point there.
Destiny, how about you? How much would it shift? Let's say even from 20-year-olds to 40-year-olds, and let's put the percentage down a bit to 10%.
From 20-year-olds to 10%. This is a massive number. Any whole percentage point that's causing people to kill themselves is going to be a pretty massive number that needs to something like violent, I would say, needs to happen in response to that. One of the this is a thing I've been kind of talking about recently. One of the challenging things with some hypotheticals and why they seem so difficult to answer, and I think even Trimmer is getting at this, is we, in our minds, whether we're aware of it or not, there's like an ontology to a human being. There are things that every human being wants to do, wants to achieve, like ideas that we have in common, and there's sometimes there'll be like a hypothetical and it challenges.
Oh, interesting. I'm gonna save my analysis on what Destiny's doing here in a second. He's diverting so goddamn hard. He is. He struggled a lot to answer the question once it challenges foundation, and that is always that's always when it gets very dicey. Euthanasia requires multiple doctors sign off on it, so it isn't on a whim issue. I didn't even think about that. Euthanasia is quite the crazy conversation, indeed.
Challenges our preconceived notion of something, not because in my mind it poses a very difficult question, but rather because it fundamentally alters some foundational ontological belief about the category, and then it challenges you to consider how you would apply standards to the category, when in reality it might change completely because now the category has changed. A vegan example I've given sometimes, people argue with me, they're like, what if there was a group of human beings that could never reciprocate moral value? Do you think it would be okay to kill these human beings? And your mind is like, well, I would never want to just kill human beings. That sounds really wrong and bad. But also in your mind, you don't consider this. A human being is not a thing that would be incapable of reciprocating moral value. That would just be inconceivable. So you've changed the category so much that whatever new standard I might apply to this doesn't really apply to the whole. And I would say that the same here. So all of this to say that when you're asking me about a thing that's causing 10% of people to kill themselves, in my mind, a rational, reasonable, and when I say rational, I don't mean some nerd with glasses who's taken all the philosophy class. I just mean like a normal human being that can evaluate their own health and safety and the environment around them. If there's something that's causing 10% of these people to kill themselves, then there's something that is egregiously or fundamentally wrong with that particular thing that needs like a significant correction or something to address it. So I was really worried, but yeah, because there's just no, in my mind, there's no way the category of human being is not a category of thing that 10% of them will kill themselves if exposed to some content. So there must be something.
I'm just thinking about whether or not I would give him this level of grace. There is a level of validity to what Destiny is saying here. If a hypothetical is approached to you that is so outrageous that it's hard to perfectly conceptualize in a reasonable manner, then at that point, it's kind of a waste of time. It really has no value in terms of the overall scenario. Because you want to pose hypotheticals that can be dissected in a way to test the logical foundations that are being introduced. In this scenario, you could say that the suicide example, this is why he related to the trans stuff, and 10% is a lot, but even if you were to less it to like 2%, there is going to be a question right there in terms of these people are being influenced in a way, some people might say problematic, some people say it's like normal, in a way to think this way because of the influx of this type of ideological content. So this scenario approaches the logical foundation if ideological content can be proven to give out harmful, just give out harm in general. Should we do something about it? So you can apply it to the logical foundation that is being given. However, there are examples of hypotheticals that are completely outrageous, and there's no way to dissect it in a way to test a logical foundation. Let me think of an example. I guess an example would be if someone's asking me, what would you do if you confronted someone who was the skinwalker of your sister that was teleported or that used a time machine from like 20 years ago to come for you because you guys are actually supposed to get married. It's just such an outrageous hypothetical that there's really no value in answering it because it makes no sense and has no level of realism. And the answer I'm giving also cannot be truly quantified into any meaningful conclusion. So I'm here with Destiny, but again, I think this is not a good example to. I think this is kind of bailing him out because of his unwillingness to answer, and I think you still can use it in a meaningful way. It's tough. Hopefully, people understood that. The topic is switching around so much, goes from free speech to prostitute people killing themselves. Really weird in my mind. Maybe the question should be framed in why it's meaningful to the overall premise. This guy does go in different directions that are not relevant. That's why I'd say objection relevance to what he's doing right now. But the suicide contagion conversation is the suicide contagion scenario plays into the concept of dangerous speech. So that is the contention that Michael is being a free speech absolutist. Can he defend dangerous speech? And this would be an example of dangerous speech very clearly emitting harm. Can he defend it as an absolutist? So this still relates to the free speech conversation, but Michael sometimes does bring up scenarios that don't play into the overall conversation. That's not very relevant sometimes.
Really, really, really wrong with that content. Yeah.
Thank you for that. So, Steph, I saw your eyes light up a second ago. I'm wondering if you want to dive in.
Sure. Yeah, I'm going to throw two things onto the table that might help kind of like distinguish your positions even further. One is just this question of, could it be that the extent to which platforming dangerous ideas serves truth depends on the circumstances, right? In some contexts, we might say more speech might be a remedy for bad speech, but in outrage-fueled echo chambers, sometimes more speech just leads to more outrage, or in this case, more suicide. So I'd be curious what Michael would say about the platform.
I don't even agree to the first premise. Or what did she say? First one.
Might be a remedy for bad speech, but in some contexts, we might say more speech might be a remedy for bad speech, but in outrage-fueled.
So in both both scenarios you provided, there's no value to the speech. I am trying to understand value to bad speech, value to dangerous speech. What can Michael argue for or against that? That's what I want to know. I think this question kind of gets
echo chambers. Sometimes more speech just leads to more outrage, or in this case, more suicide. So I'd be curious what Michael would say about the platforms and the algorithms and what what content is being amplified and how that affects the extent to which dangerous ideas actually do serve truth. And then the second, I'm just going to throw something else onto the table too, and that is just this question of whether truth is kind of like the ultimate value that we're even after. We see circumstances in which truth exists in tension with other values. The famous example of, if Nazis knock on your door, do you tell them that Anne Frank is hiding inside? And different wisdom traditions have different ways of kind of acknowledging.
That's a very good question. It opens up. I don't think it's relevant to the. Well, I focus on value, not truth. Value can be equated to different things: truth, joy, harm reduction. What's the opposite of harm? Like helpfulness. It can have like different criteria that plays into its ultimate value, but you would have to argue what the value is, because ultimately it's not the truth that I care about, it's the benefit to society that I care about. The benefit to society can be all these different things that I said. Good question. Curious to see how they answer it.
Judging that, for example, the three transcendentals: goodness, truth, beauty. So like, are we always and only and exclusively after truth, or does truth exist in tension with other values in ways that would affect?
I would be
our
very
desire
interested
platform
to either
dangerous
moderate
ideas.
it or be a part of this.
Can I
debate.
add a quick thing? Because I'd be curious here, Michael, when we're talking about this. Just on the vein of that question, I'm curious. Two questions paired. Is X a platform today that has more or less freedom of speech than it did 3 or 4 years ago? And then the second question is, do you think X is a better platform today or a worse platform today than it was 3 or 4 years ago? Kind of on the back of Stephanie's questions, yeah.
Okay. Well, I guess on that, I think it's better, Destiny, but it also has a lot more downsides. Again, it's platforming the Alex Jones.
How is it better if it has more downsides?
Lunatic and kooks out there promoting dangerous ideas. Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, there's, I guess, a trade-off there.
It doesn't make sense to me.
So, Stephanie, you mentioned that.
How is something better, but it has more downsides? What? I feel like he answered based off the conclusion, based off the principle versus the logic. His principle, free speech absolutism. The logic, more harm equals probably bad.
The Nazi comes to your door and asks if you're hiding Anne Frank, and you are. Should you lie? Yes, you should lie. Okay, so what we have here is a conflict between deontological ethics, Kant's categorical imperative. It's always wrong to lie, with the utilitarian or consequentialist ethics that the greater good for the greatest good for the greatest number, and so on. These cannot be resolved ultimately where one is right and the other is wrong. It depends on the context. The famous trolley problem where the train is hurtling down the tracks about to kill the 5 workers, and you can throw the switch and kill 1 worker. Do you do it? Almost everybody goes, well, yeah, of course. Kill the 1 to save the 5. But if you're in a waiting room at a hospital and there's 5 dying patients, and they come out and take you and say, we're going to sacrifice you and harvest.
Yeah, I don't know how he could answer better, to be honest.
You're not going to be vibing that.
It's kind of ridiculous.
And no one will. No one wants to live in a society where that could happen. So we're constantly going back and forth between these deontological and consequentialist ethics. That's part of the sacrifice you and harvest the track's about to kill the 5 workers, and you can throw the switch and kill 1 worker. Do you do it? Almost everybody goes, well, yeah, of course. Kill the 1 to save the 5. But if you're in a waiting room at a hospital and there's 5 dying patients, and they come out and take you and say, we're going to sacrifice you and harvest your organs to save the 5 patients, you're not going to be vibing that, and no one will. No one wants to live in a society where that could happen. So we're constantly going back and forth between these deontological and consequentialist ethics. That's part of it'll never be resolved because it depends on the context, to your point, Stephanie. Now on the social media platforms, let me clayman Destiny's argument here, which I think is good. Nice. That there's something called the Pareto distribution or power law distributions. Famous examples where like 1% of musicians make 99% of the music sales. 5% of athletes make 95% of the contract money for salaries. And 1% of authors sell 99% of books, and so on. Well, in the podcasting world, that there's a Pareto distribution there. Like I don't know, maybe the top 10 or top 100 podcasts, they have like 99% of the market. Joe Rogan himself, he's probably a Pareto distribution of 80-20 by himself. And that seems to be the case with social media. I thought for a while that the correction to the abuses on Twitter were just other platforms where you have microblogging, or whatever they call that. And that has not happened. And I don't think it can happen. Like I tried some of the other platforms that came up. I joined them. I went over there. I posted. Nothing happens because no one's there. And so everybody knows that no one's there, and everybody knows that everyone knows that no one's over there. So they all.
I just don't. Why is this relevant? Objection relevance. What is this? Doesn't. I don't know. I feel like there's no enhanced perspective being shown here.
I'll just stick with X, right? And I think that's the way it is with Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. There's, maybe there'll be a new platform that I can't think of that's different. But if you want, like
Michael
Blue Sky
Shermer,
now, where all the progressives are, to compete with X, there's nobody there. I joined. I went over there. It's boring. and I post just radical stuff just to see if anybody's even listening. And no, they're not. No one cares. So I'm like, okay, I'm back to X. So my idea of a kind of a free market solution, let the marketplace of ideas, I don't think it could work with the way the economy is structured and the way these things happen in the real world.
I still don't
Disney,
understand.
any thoughts on that? Anything you wanted that brought up for you? We've got about 10 minutes left or so. We want to make sure we get into some final points or statements, but there's why don't you just open that up?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that more structured areas are better than less structured areas. I think there's something to be said for the fact that when liberals or lefties or progressives tried to make their own space, it was Blue Sky, which is a pretty sterile, boring platform without as much engagement. And when conservatives tried to make their own platforms, we got Gab and Parler, which to some extent was used by Proud Boys to coordinate infiltrations into the Capitol and other terrorist or white nationalist groups. And all of them are the most hateful, disgusting, terrible places ever, and they fail in about a year or two. I think that speaks sometimes to the difference in sides there. I would also say that it's interesting when we talk about the difference between Blue Sky and X here for the interest that we have in the platform. It really comes from the audience size of the platform. X didn't get big as a platform because it was a free speech radical platform where I can see a Mexican, a Sudanese guy, and an incel all doing Hitler Nazi salutes in some Miami nightclub outside or whatever. I don't think this is why X became popular, why Twitter became popular. It became popular because there are a lot of users that enjoyed the features of the site when it was more heavily moderated. That's where the huge user base came from. And Elon inherited that. And then I would argue the platform is significantly degraded now compared to where it used to be, at least in the political section. None of these, for all of the kind of fantasizing about the ultimate unbridled free speech platforms people have, none of them, as far as I'm aware, have ever been wildly successful ever. It's only been the converting of a platform to something with more free speech after it's been more restrictive. Do you even see these things have a chance to survive? X in its current state, if made into a new platform, would never have made. Actually, Elon might have even tried to start on a social media platform called X before he bought Twitter. I could be wrong on that. But Facebook and Twitter and all these other huge platforms obviously have a lot of moderated content, and we're the most wildly successful platforms now.
Base Mike, you're so smart.
So just before we go into these to some closing statements and reflections, there's something unresolved, I think, between you guys, or a difference, which is that. So Michael, when you began your opening statement, you were talking about, you both talked a lot about context, that context matters for truth seeking very much, right? So I think there's an agreement there. But Michael, in your opening statement, the sense was there's no real way who's going to define the context? Me, you, the government?
Myron definitely got hit with that
rollerblade satisfactorily, free marketplace of ideas.
He got hit and his girl got hit in the back.
You've talked about, different types of intervention, military action at one point. So who decides the context? Who has the legitimacy to decide the context of where ideas are explored? So, maybe Mike, you go first, and then Destiny, I'd be curious your thoughts on that.
Oh, well, yeah. Okay. So back to where I originally argued that, we, all of us, the consumers, decide.
The people and outcomes decide the context. All right, I'm done with this. There are things I like. I just don't think ideas got challenged enough. It's just too. I'm fine with friendly, but I need friendly with intention. I just don't think that's what happened here, personally. I like Destiny's answers better, basically. It did feel a little shallow. Destiny, I feel like, gave good answers and was able to engage. Michael, I don't think as much. And based off his own answers, he's not a free speech absolutist. So I don't understand his intention to call himself as such. I don't get that.